Okay, well, this is our last class, which is always a shock to the system.
Yeah.
We made it, you feel like you're really getting on a roll, you know what I mean? But we will be talking about color this week. But before I launch into talking about color, I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion and let you know that I have this painting, this still life painting in the OPA Salon at the Quinlan Visual Arts Center in Georgia. And that show opens June 10th to August 7th. And the paintings are indeed for sale in that exhibit. Very exciting to be in that show. And then I also have a show this summer at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Museum. It's called the Western Art Show or the Western Spirit Art Show, and that opens July 22nd to August 17th. If you are really interested in the paintings in the show, and I'll have 4 paintings in this exhibit, they have an event called like Jump the Gun, where if you are like determined to get one of the paintings, you can buy the paintings at a slightly elevated price point. They call it the Jump the Gun price. So all the paintings are a little percentage higher than they normally are, but it kind of, then you get to, you know, I think you have to pay a special fee to even be in the Jump the Gun situation. But the show opens to the general public on July 22nd. And I'm very excited that I am going to fly out for it this year. Last year was my first year in the show, I was so excited to have gotten a call from a museum curator to be invited to a show out west of all places, you know, and then everything like went insane and it went online only. It was like a virtual experience last year. So this year they're doing it in person. So I am going to fly out with my family and kind of have the whole experience and get to go to the governor's mansion and all that kind of stuff. So I am hyped about it. This is one of the paintings in the show, the only landscape that I'm putting in the show, which is why I put it in here since this is a landscape class. I'm really using a lot of color activity in this landscape painting too. So, okay. Thus ends my shameless self-promotion portion of the introduction for this class. And we are going to launch into color. Now, color is a big topic. And I will confess that every time I'm going to talk about color, I feel anxiety because I understand what a big topic it is. And there are so many ways to approach it. And the truth is that there's always people who know more and do it better and have this angle or that angle, and they can spout this theory and they can use these big words. And even though I am a colorist and I've read extensively and I've worked in a practical sense as a painter focused on color for most of my career, the more you paint, the more you realize what you don't know. And so I like to preface this particular talk with saying that this is my humble offering to you on color. Some of my ideas and the things that I find to be the most useful when I am approaching color in painting, and some of the ways that I think about color. So right out of the gate, I want to give some basic color vocabulary that I use. And the first thing is that when I am talking about color, I am not really talking about color theory so much as I am talking about perceptual color, perceived color, the human experience of color, how we actually see color and how color changes according to our vision. And the concept of local color, which if you've studied much color, usually this terminology comes up. Local color is something that doesn't exactly exist. It's to do with perception because it's the generalized color of an object without considering the influence of reflection, surrounding color. It's meant to be ordinary daylight, whatever the named color for a thing would be. You know, if the grass looks green, it's green grass. If the apple looks red, it's a red apple. If I'm wearing a black shirt, you would say you would call the local color of the shirt black. Although in reality, we all know as painters that as soon as you name a color and then you try to apply light and shade to it, it's no longer that color exactly the same in the light as it is in the shade. And you immediately get into nuance, but it's useful language to say, oh, the local color of something is X. Are there any questions about those just basic color vocabulary out of the gate? Okay. So this is a painting that I did of a beautiful model wearing a yellow kimono in sunlight. And so the kimono was yellow, is the local color, but because it had shine, and because all things do this, but they do even more when they have shine, there is a changed experience when I was actually painting it. So what I went ahead and did is I used the color picker tool in Photoshop, and I selected sections of this painting to show you what the actual colors were. So in order to paint this yellow shiny kimono in sunlight, I ended up using this array of colors as it landed. And you'll immediately see that none of the colors that I have picked are overtly yellow. Like, which one is the most yellow? But quite a lot of them are hardly yellow at all. In fact, don't even directionally look yellow. So, and this is because the way we actually experience color is perpetually in context. So one thing, you can find a million of these examples online. So when we see color, we only see it in relationship to the colors around it. That's how our brains and our eyes experience color. There is even a word for what is measurable color, and it's called psychophysical. This is not a word I use at any moment other than this exact one when I am looking at this exact slide during this lecture. But it is useful to know that there is measurable scientific color, and then there is our experience of color, or perceptual color, which is what we'll mostly look at. But so what's fascinating about this is an optical illusion where you can see that the inner square here, it looks green, and here it looks brown. Measurably, they are the exact same color, but because they're surrounded by a different field, our eyes perceive them as something else. So this is actually how we see color, and is why it is so challenging to paint it and to pin it down, because everything that's happening impacts the color that you see. The color that you see when you're even just looking at something very controlled like a still life, the color of the walls in the room are impacting the color that you see in the still life. The red barn behind you is impacting the colors of the landscape that you're looking at. The color of your shirt is impacting the colors that you see around yourself. We're doing it so intuitively that we don't even recognize all the factors of influence. So as a painter, what you start to realize is that color is always changing. Color is changing in life. It's changing on your paintings. It's changing on your palette according to the things that you mix. So when you put your first notes down on your painting, they look like one color. As soon as you surround them with other things, they are a different color to your eyes. The same when you're mixing paint on your palette. So it's good to just know that this is happening and you're not crazy. That when you put that first note down and it looked perfectly accurate, it probably was at that moment more accurate. But as you adjusted all the colors around it, yes, it did in fact change. It was not that you made some big mistake in the beginning. So that's one of the reasons why most people who are teaching color, they have you move very swiftly to getting all of your colors either on your canvas so that they're all surrounded by each other and you can see everything in context in the image, or they have you pre-mix all of your colors on your palette before you ever put them on your board so that you are seeing them in relationship to each other on your palette. So either way is valid. The key is that you are not mixing each color in an isolated moment, but you are seeing each color geographically next to other colors that you are going to use in the painting. So this is a resource that I wanted to share with you guys. I'm going to post, oops, I got to select this and I'm going to put it in the chat. Um, hold on while I fumble about getting this into the chat here. This is a website called Hue Value Chroma. So I started out as a colorist studying in a specific color school of painting called the Cape Cod School of Art. I had a branch in Annapolis, and I was studying with all the people who had studied in that school. And I was taught a lot of things in the early days that I just absorbed as truth because the teacher spoke them. As I grew forward in time, I had many people question the things that I had been taught about color and color perception. And a lot of people told me that I had been brainwashed. And so I started to realize that, well, if I'm going to tell people that they've been brainwashed to think that the grass is always green and the sky is always blue, I'd better be ready to hear that I'm brainwashed also. And not just dismiss it, but actually be willing to investigate it the way I'm asking other people to investigate the way that they understand color. So I started a project to find scientific evidence for some of the artistic principles that I had been taught. And it's not a project that I have been obsessed with, but over many years, I have just been interested in reading articles or finding blogs or, reading magazines. I love Scientific American, actually does some very interesting articles on how the brain operates and things like that. But this is the best one by far, because this has all the science, but they relate it to art and perception. It's called Hue Value Chroma, and it's David Briggs. Deep dive for sure, and he gets very technical with things. My favorite article is this one, which is the one that he wrote for children. And it still gets kind of heady when you go to read this article, but he does a pretty good job of simplifying the language in this particular one. This is the blog that if I have a question or if I'm looking to learn something more deeply, I might go and look in this blog, and then it will rabbit trail you quickly into other things. Okay, so there's your resource for more of those things. Now, this is the same painting, only now notice that my color picking has been changed and I have put a blue field around the color dots. That is because when I originally did the color picking, I thought, hey, this is great. Photoshop is measuring the color for me. I'm going to just demonstrate it to everyone. But I was dissatisfied with the graphic because as I looked at the colors, I thought, man, they really don't look at all luminous the way they look in the painting. They don't look like they have any relationship to this painting. Like they seem so arbitrary, right? So I was playing around and I decided to color pick this gray blue area down here, and I put the field around the color spot, and bam, immediately the colors feel more luminous. They're because of the contrast, and they look more plausibly like colors that you are seeing in the painting. So this experience alone of just making this color graphic confirms how we experience colors in relationship to each other. So the local color being yellow, the perceived actual colors being more like ochres and grays and greens. We all know that we see differently based on context. So procedurally, we need to find a way to recreate context, which means seeing colors next to each other and never seeing them in isolation. Okay, so I do want to go into a little bit more into like my palette and other vocabulary and language that I use. So the main vocabulary that I use for color is that I say that it's light versus dark, or like when I'm talking about value, then I'll say it's lighter or darker, or I might say it's brighter versus richer. So brighter versus richer is a little bit more ambiguous, but when I say that, when I say bright, I mean it's lighter, and when I say it's rich, I mean it's darker. Lighter and darker is pretty self-explanatory. In general, with color language, I like to say it's warmer and cooler temperatures of color, and it's clean and it's muddy. Another thing that I will do is I will say that a color leans in a direction. For example, it is a red leaning blue or a green leaning blue. And in this sense, I'm really revealing how I think about color, and especially when I'm mixing it. Because I think about color as existing in space, like on a color wheel or in a spatial axis. And when color is changing, it's moving, it's going in a direction. So anytime you start with one color and you change it in any way, you think about that color moving in a direction. You can, on a wheel, you can go, oh, is it moving, it's closer to the center where it's brighter, or closer to the outside where it's darker. Or if you're thinking in the color space, you can think, oh, I'm in the blue, but where am I going in the color space directionally when I go to orange? So I set up my palette that way to facilitate my thinking in color as directional and movable. So I start out with my yellows, and then I move into orange and red, blue, green, and then I have my muddy colors down here, my brown and my black. So white is also like a neutral, but white does lean just a little bit cool. I do know people who are really into having a cold white and a warm white. I have tried that and I don't find it necessarily useful because most warm whites are actually not like a clean warm direction. They lean a little bit orange or a little bit yellow orange in their warmth, which ends up graying any color that is not also a yellow or an orange. So I find it most useful to just have a simple titanium white and just understand that it does cool things off a little bit when you're mixing. But the key thing here is that I have a warm and a cool of each of my colors, and that they each are set up in a logical direction. So if my orange is over here, then my green are leaning. So here I drew this arrow to show how it circles around like this for all the clean colors. My green leaning or my cold leaning yellow, and my orange leaning or my warm yellow, side by side. Then I have my two oranges. This orange we already saw when I was showing you some mixing, that even though it looks red, when you mix it with white to the same value, this is a yellow leaning orange, and this is more of a middle or red leaning orange. So we have see how it's then directionally closer to yellow, directionally closer to red. Same with my reds, my warm red, my cold red. And my cold red has been at different points. It has been alizarin, permanent rose. I have Perylene has sometimes hit my palette, but I usually use Perylene as my warm red. This is a cad red, and I use cad as my more warm red. Perylene is a pretty good substitute for cadmium red, though, as a fairly middle note red. Then you can get into the violets. I use dioxazine violet and permanent magenta if I am not using alizarin. And so then you clearly, the magentas are leaning red. The dioxazine violet or Windsor violet, it leans to the blue. For my blues, I have my brain is blanking. Ultramarine. Why can't I remember the simplest color? Okay, ultramarine blue, which is my red leaning blue. And then I have Viridian, which I use as my warm blue. I do not generally consider Viridian to be my green. I consider it to be my warm blue because it is so cold that when you mix it with things, it acts more as a blue than anything else, in my opinion. Now, then when you get over to black, black is definitely a blue, and brown is representing a dark, muddy yellow. So, but both of them obviously are not clean. You have to mix across the wheel, to get it to be muddy. It's not mixing with something adjacent. And the idea with all these colors up here is that they are mixing with their adjacent thing. And then if I want to say, hey, I've got something yellow, but I want it to die, which is another language that I use, kill or die, a way of neutralizing a clean color or making it muddy, if I want to kill something, I would not go to an adjacent color. If I want to kill yellow, I would not go to orange, and I would not go to green. I would have to go further away and lean away from, geographically away from the yellow. The same is true elsewhere. If you want to make something muddy, you find on the color wheel something that is across or just away from it in order to do that. Okay, the other thing, language that I often use when I'm mixing is having something called a kicker color. And when I am mixing on my palette, I do tend to mix piles of paint that I pull from throughout my painting. And a lot of times they might be mixtures, you know, where I go, oh, this is generally, these three colors mixed together are going to give me, you know, this field, that tree. But there are modifications to that color, and I will make a kicker pile where I say, but I see a lot of places where things are pushing a little bit purple. So I might pick a purple and mix a clean color string of it that is also possibly even a value string where I have a darker of that purple, a middle value of that purple, and a lighter value of that purple. And it's my kicker color. I might, you know, go in and paint everything with my big paint piles, but then I have these clean colors that I have also mixed that are ready to go in and push and pull things in different directions. Okay. Are there, sorry, I had this bigger slide on my palette I could have been using. I am not talking that much about opaques and transparents. I talk about that in other classes, but are there any questions? Well, feel free, if you have questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat. So Sarah can ask if you're at all confused about the idea of color leaning in a direction or any of the language. There is a lot of language about color. There's chroma, vibrance, you know, all these kinds of things. It can get very confusing until you get really comfortable with it. I most often don't find the need to use that language. Just saying if it's colder or warmer, if it's darker or lighter, if it's clean or it's muddy, those things generally do it. That's enough language to move me around the map of the color space with as much, you know, ease as I need.
Abigail, can you explain clean and muddy again?
Yes,
like a clean color
represents like the color when you are looking at like a yellow. If it's a clean, bright yellow that is not at all neutralized or grayed out, that's a clean color. And then a muddy color is something, usually a muddy color would be something that you would either start to name it gray, brown, taupe, beige, you know, like if you can't name it immediately, it's not that clean, right? So if you can't look at it and just say it's yellow, red, or blue, then it's already, you know, I mean, orange is still pretty clean and green is still can be pretty clean. But once you get off of the main color names that you learned in kindergarten, then it's probably some kind of mud. And the harder it is to name the color, the muddier it is. And in reality, those are the colors that really show how good of a colorist you are. Because if you can be specific with your muddy colors, then you are showing real nuance, where it's not that hard to be specific with a very clean, bright color, where you essentially just mixing it straight out of the tube, like all of these. Did that clarify? Okay, so one thing I want to talk about is now, maybe this is a good time for a break. What time is it? Are we about a half an hour in?
We're about a half an hour in.
Oh no, let's go a little longer before we go for the break. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about color shift and atmospheric perspective. So the standard understanding of atmospheric perspective is that if you make things bluer, then they will recede in space. And that is true to a point, but it can also shift in other color directions. The prime examples of this are, I already took her out. Prime examples of this are in the sunrise and sunset when everything shifts overtly warmly, either to a yellow, to a red, to an orange. because of the color of the whole sky. And so, but the reason why you have all the blue shift is something called Rayleigh scattering. And so here I have another resource for you if you're interested in a deep dive. This is from Humboldt College, and I will put it in the chat. I thought this was a pretty good description of the Rayleigh scattering if you're interested in being able to talk about it at dinner parties. It's why the sky is blue, and it has to do with wavelengths and, you know, how the different colors are on different wavelengths and they act differently when they hit particles and things like that. And it is interesting, but I'm interested right now in the very practical elements of what do we actually do about it as painters. And so it's good to know that there is a reason why everything shifts blue in general, but you've already experienced how it can shift in different ways at different times of day. So there are some other atmospheric perspective basics are that the more you go into the distance, the lower contrast things become, the lighter in value they generally become, the less texture and detail they have, and the color shifts tend to become more similar to each other, so that there's a unifying element as things go back, which is evidenced in all three of these graphic illustrations. Here, unifying, you know, and getting lighter, but none of these rules are hard and fast. So one really interesting, this graphic is from David Briggs' Hue Value Chroma blog. It is an excellent graphic because it shows how holding rigidly to some of these rules and doing systematic following of the rules can actually lead you slightly astray. So in this graphic, he has a red ball with a white stripe, and he's used the perspective language of scale and things reducing to show perspective distance, but then he did just systematically make it bluer overall and bluer overall. While yes, it does create some feeling of spatial distance, what it also creates is just a blue fog. It doesn't necessarily look like it's so distant as much as that there was a blue mist in the air, which is not the same as atmospheric perspective. So let's look at some artistic examples of these things. The blue shift. So this is a Levitan. We've already seen it before, but this is an excellent example of how things are warmer in the foreground and gradually shifting bluer. And here is the cleanest, brightest blue right here in the distance. And it's also getting a little bit lighter as it goes back. Now you might see high contrast here, but if you just look at the relationship of the land masses, dark, lighter, lighter, dark, and fairly neutral actually, and then much bluer, and then bluer yet again. And yet it's bluest right here, and it's allowed to get a little bit muddier over here, and it's a little bit muddier over here. Part of that, I think, well, that can happen when you're looking at a scene, but also that's pulling our eye with this beautiful color vibrancy to this sweet spot of this most distant point that's still inside the painting. Here's another example of some blue shift in paintings. This is a Frank Hobbs. We've looked at him before, but not this particular one. And you can see he's got it really organized, set up with high contrast, high texture, lots of color variety in the foreground. And then it's getting neutralized with blue going back, and then bluer yet again as we approach the sky. And we're even set into a blue context because you've given the blue of the sky with the water reflecting it. Now, let's look at red shift. So this looks like a sunset painting. This is George T. Thurmond, who I would credit with a lot of my color understanding from some of my time that I spent painting with him. The land masses are actually getting more red as they recede. See how they have an ochre color here, and then they're getting redder and redder, although there's a shift right here. But this is very red back here. Now we look at Daniel Garber. He's doing atmospheric perspective with a red shift, giving you that evening glow vibe. He's got it dark, shaded in the foreground with lots of textural variety, and then things are shifting and getting downright pink here in the background. So getting redder and redder as we move away. Now, there are some other things that can be in play, like you have the shadow here, and then the local color of the grass maybe was actually brighter. Um, so those things do have to be kept in mind. We hold these things lightly and we allow multiple things to influence us as we push forward. He has actually unified this foreground into a neutral dark. So here we see examples of two completely different approaches. He's setting up a big dark foreground, but he's holding it with a unified color mass that is all fairly neutral, although highly textured. Whereas Frank Hobbs here is giving us a lot of color variety in our foreground. So it's just an example of how you can pick and choose the language that you attach to. You can always give lots of color variety in the foreground and less color variety in the background. That's one choice. Here's another choice where you are actually holding down your foreground as a silhouetted neutral and not giving all that color variety. But there are other elements of language that are in place, like scale, texture, value shifting. And these things are available to us as we design. And we'll also, I think, choose our personal aesthetics and what we enjoy seeing in paintings. So now here is where it gets a little bit crazy, because when you look at the clouds in the sky, this is Oliver Akers Douglas to Wes Noyle. Love this cloud study that he did, and all the overlapping dovetailing forms in the landscape has a beautiful sweeping context. Clearly somebody who knows about color. Look at this foreground shadow right here, setting things up. Now that I've pointed out foreground shadow to you, do you not see it just everywhere? All expressed in many different ways. But this painting is expressing redshift in a way that you've probably seen, but never quite realized that it was redshift even in a blue context, because clearly we have a blue sky, but the clouds themselves, when you're painting clouds, you quickly realize that, of course, you can't paint them all titanium white. They have to be different light and shade to give them form and things like that. And then you quickly realize they can't all be clean colors either, because you run out of clean color quickly. So you have to kind of have these muddy purples and ochres and things in them. But then as you start to go back in space, if you have been taught the blue shift theory of atmospheric perspective, then you start to just go, well, I'll just make all my clouds slightly bluer with every band as they go back in space. And if you've ever tried it, you know that the clouds just quickly disappear into the sky and they don't continue to look like clouds against the sky. And you can't just add blue and have it still read. So you start observing the clouds more closely and you go, oh, actually, the clouds are getting warmer as they go away from you instead of getting cooler, so that they are red here in the middle ground and then orange all the way here in the far distance, which seems completely counterintuitive to this blue shift that we've been taught. So I'd always done this in clouds, and I had early in my own color training had been told to not overly trust blue shift atmospheric perspective. And I had a moment when I was, still really getting started, and I went up to Provincetown and I was painting with Hilda Neely and Mary Jean Marino, and it was my first time going, and I was really intimidated because they're color masters, and I was just a little baby painter, and that I was also someone who studied with other colorists, so I really wanted to impress them, and so we're just painting together casually. It wasn't a class, and so I'm painting, and I'm really doing my best, and I'm setting up my color notes, and I'm trying to see them in relationship, and I'm really trying to be faithful to what I see to impress them. But I'm stressing hard because I know about perspective shifting in blue. And as I'm painting this marsh scene as it's going back, I was like, guys, am I crazy? But I feel like things are getting warmer as they go back instead of cooler. And Hilda goes, should we tell her? And I was like, what? And they go, that whole blue thing is a lie. Things do get warmer as they go back. And I was like, what? Mind blown, and here I was actually experiencing it before they had told it to me, and then they confirmed it. Now, the truth is a little bit in between because yes, blue shift happens. It's real, but so does red shift. So one of the circumstances where it is most apparent is with white clouds. And I can delighted to say that I have scientific evidence to prove redshift in white clouds from the Hue Value Chroma blog. So I have this quote here from him, from that Hue Value Chroma blog. I'm just going to read it real quick. This basic principle, like many here, was clearly set out by Arthur Pope. Pope also noted that the situation is more complex for atmospheric perspective, where the blue color is derived by scattering from the light passing through the medium. In that case, for light-toned objects, the addition of bluish light from the atmosphere is often exceeded by the removal of bluish light by scattering on the way to the eye. Thus, light-toned objects tend to become somewhat warm-hued, at least up to the middle distance. Pope, 1931. So this is actually not even new information. This has been known to us for a while. But it is easier to just hear snippets of rules and then to just follow them slavishly, right? And we just take the rule, we absorb it, and then we just try to use it, just like with perspective, where you learn perspective in junior high, and then you just try to like force everything into that kind of perspective. But as you move into more advanced thinking or more diligent observation, you quickly see that things start to fall apart. And that's either confusing or revelatory, depending on how far you want to go. Now we know that perspective falls apart for many reasons, partly because of two eyes, partly because of lines bending and not always remaining straight. And then now we know that this blue shift that we wanted to have so much faith in because it sounded so simple is more complex than that. And things can shift in many color directions as they move through space. And it is observable. Now, this is a painting that I did, a very large painting for me on site, 24 by 48. So I lugged this huge canvas up this hill and I'm painting a vista scene. When I start my paintings, I am mixing color. And when I lay my first notes down, I am trying to set up the direction that the color is going to go. So I'm not just trying to paint, just pinpoint a color, match it perfectly, and then place that color on my canvas in exactly the perfect spot with exactly the perfect drawing, because I'm not an exactly perfect person. And I never will be. And I don't think anyone is, except maybe my husband. But he doesn't believe that he is. I just, really think he's great. So, so when I'm painting, so you see, I set up color variety and high contrast and texture in my foreground, and I hit all of these colors with a broad note. I saw that things were shifting red, and so I painted them bright pink. Then I saw as they went all the way to the far distance that they shifted blue. So I painted it bright blue. Then and this was actually like a bright yellow ochre kind of color. This was all established as like almost like an ultramarine mixed with, well, depending, out here it would have been maybe straight ultramarine blue. In here, this would have just been brown or alizarin and brown mixed together. So I was establishing them as darks and more neutralized as compared to these other colors out here. And then the sky, I did, I think like an orange and yellow, but I clearly saw that the sky leaned bluer as it went this way and it leaned oranger as it went this way. So I set that ombre up right from the get-go. So I put all my big color spots in, and then I start developing them. And I start really developing the foreground element, right? And by the middle of the painting, it was sort of obvious that maybe I didn't even need to go and change these colors much. I had painted the direction of the color with exaggeration And by the time I had set up all the relationships in the foreground, they read just fine. And it was exciting, and it felt like distance, and it felt like beautiful color. And I just left it. And it was one of the most successful paintings I did that whole year. And I often do this in smaller paintings, but then after I set down my big color direction notes, I go back over them and back over them like this here, where you see I put in all of the adjustments. They hold to a mass, they hold to an area of similar color and value. So yes, this is generally yellow, but it's got warmer and cooler yellows. It's got lighter and darker. You know, it has a little bit of variety within some boundaries that keep it holding to a mass. And the same over here. But what it really reveals is that if you're willing to go a little bit further out in your first notes, you might find yourself being able to be more expressive about color by the end. In some ways, it's easier to be a little wild in the beginning of your painting and then rein it in than it is to make something that feels very tightly realistic and then make it wild. Um, so just telling you the little story about that painting. So this is a Daniel Garber, Delaware Hillside. So this is a good example of more blue, but not so much all doing a progressive, you know, shifting into lighter values as it goes back. In fact, if anything, it's shifting in the opposite direction where things appear to be getting lighter as they get closer to us. See how these trees are all lit up. And so even though we learned that you can do this, right? You can have just a linear logical progression that each band gets lighter and lighter, and it will set up a type of space and distance. We do not need to hold rigidly to it. You can observe the scene, and you can use certain anchors that depict and communicate reality, and they can be adjusted. They can bend to their circumstance, the way that color is always bending to its circumstance. So he has high contrast, he has texture getting slowly more unified, he has a lot of green, right? But it is gradually, in general, going from warmer to bluer as it shifts back. Now, this is Twatman, one of the great poets in the landscape, a painting called Springtime, a really big painting too. And I've even gotten to see this in person, and it really is astounding. It's fairly almost monochromatic, right? But it does have some subtle color shifts. Even though it's pretty monochromatic, you really experience those color shifts. And so in some ways, this is really an opposition to what I did here, where I pushed the separation of the colors. And I made that part of the story of the language of color in the painting, right? And Twatman is doing something else. He has probably desaturated the scene according to how he saw it, and yet is still showing color variety. But we read it as that variety. So we will read color when it is wildly in variation, and we will read it when it is subtle. Being a colorist doesn't mean that you have to paint things full color spectrum like this. You can, but you don't have to have beautiful color. This is also beautiful color. And he has areas that might be clean, but it feels like a lot of these colors are just variations on a gray theme. So he also is not following that linear value progression where things are darker and getting gradually lighter. Look at how this little piece of land right here is like popping completely out of that pattern. And why? This looks to be kind of a cloudy day. Maybe the sun is peeking out. So there can be circumstances when you've got random things that happen that seemingly contradict rules that you've been given. And when you're in the landscape, sometimes that's your opportunity to capture a special moment. We absorb all of these rules, we use them, we make them intuitive, but we don't cling to them so tightly that we block ourselves off from experience, the actual experience of the world, the experience of maybe a slightly unusual phenomenon. So have you ever been in the landscape when it was a cloudy day and then the sun popped out through the cloud and it lit up one moment in the landscape, but everything else was still in shadow? Is that what happened here? Maybe, but this is a 50 by 36-inch painting. I don't know if he was on site when he was painting it, but this was a decision. This was not in a little 6 by 8, oh, I'm going to capture this flickering light effect. This was a design decision. And it doesn't make it overtly obvious that that's what was happening. But look at the poetry that we're gifted with because he made this painting for us. Do we care that he did not adhere to linear value progression getting lighter as it goes? Like, no, we don't care. We care that it's beautiful. We care that we want to go find that spot, like, and either paint it ourselves or have a picnic. It's glorious. So I just want to take this opportunity to make sure that even though I'm giving you, some of the principles that are involved, that we don't ever get too rigid with it, that we forget to actually observe in the moment and take the opportunity in the moment when you're painting to learn from your actual experience, paint what you're actually seeing. Yes, we orchestrate everything that we see, but you want to keep and reserve some space for you to actually question what I'm saying. I don't always know, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe they're all wrong. Maybe we just found a new particle, possibly a new force in physics, right? Like, we might be wrong. Maybe you're the one who's going to lead the way. It's going to be exciting. Okay. So here, I wanted to point out that some of the language that he is using for his perspective, he's using some standard atmospheric perspective, using the blue shift, he's using texture, not adhering to, that value progression. And then my question was, why is he not adhering to it? What happened? Either it was perceptual, he had that physical experience and he's trying to reflect that experience, or it could be pure design decision. Maybe he just wanted to do it because he thought it would look great. And that is also valid. So all of these things, it's like jazz. We learn the notes and we play with the notes and we get experimental. Okay, that is the break. So that was a good spot for a break. I feel like I really went on a little bit of a rant right there. Like, we'll take 5 minutes. Let's see, it's 1:53, so let's come back at 1:58, and we're going to talk when we come back about painting green in nature. Okay. I'm back. We can start making our way back to our computers. I grabbed a quick snack.
Excellent.
I'm very into hot beverages, no matter what the time of year. Like, even when it's scalding hot outside.
Oh my goodness.
Hot things. And my mom is like that too. I used to think that she was crazy, and now I'm clearly just turning into her. So,
oh my goodness.
right? Like,
that's pretty funny. Does she know that you like hot beverages now too?
I don't know. I definitely used to make fun of her for it. So, like,
oh, that's
so,
I
gotta eat that. Oh, it's terrible. You don't know how much you're putting your foot in it when you're a kid making fun of your parents, and then and then they catch you.
Yeah.
She used to tell me that drinking hot beverages is better when it's hot outside because it makes you sweat just a little bit, and the sweating cools you off. And I just remember rolling my eyes so hard at that. And just being like, or maybe don't make yourself hotter. Like, but then I literally think I did read it in an article then later. Oh, that's the worst. Okay. So, all right, we're going to talk about painting green in nature. I mean, honestly, green is both the greatest blessing and biggest curse of the landscape painter. And it makes sense because we actually do see more green in the spectrum than any other color. Like we can see the nuance of green. So there's a lot of green around us, but we also just see green so clearly. We certainly see green more clearly than we see like into the violets. So it makes sense that we would grapple with it greatly. So this is that same Twatman painting that we had already looked at called Summer. Great big painting, big, beautiful, sweeping, very green landscape. So when we get into looking at this painter and we start analyzing it for color, and we see how everything does seem very green, and it's you think that maybe he just painted everything green and he just shifted it a little bit cooler or a little bit warmer from green. But when you isolate the colors, you're going to see just how far they lean from green. So here's my color picking that I did for you on this painting. The grass is very yellow indeed. And you see how the grass is just slightly more yellow or slightly deeper in colors, a little bit darker yellow here than it is over there. I think I find that kind of interesting, that nuance, you know. How the shadow here is getting very blue indeed. Here inside the shadow, as it's closer to the tree, the shadow color is very different. In fact, this is one of the most overtly green moments that there are. But when you look at this green, even then, that looks like a gray green, not a pure clean green, right? Now we get up here into where the tree is silhouetted by the sky, and you see just how blue it has shifted by the blue of the sky eating around and influencing it. This is, to me, one of the other truly green moments in the scene right here, but it's just very dark. Still not that clean. This is downright peachy. Look, this is not, I mean, I would be hard pressed to call that green looking at it down here, like at all. And yet, when we look at it in the scene, doesn't it just feel like a variation on a green theme? And isn't it a little shocking that something that is the complement could read as a variation on a green theme? I mean, I am constantly amazed at how much variety there can be in color, in the world of color, and yet it not read as something odd at all. In fact, you have to get pretty extreme before things read as odd to the eye. And then here, this distant land, which definitely reads purplish, is actually barely purplish at all when you color pick it here. There are some moments where it is a cleaner purple, but they are small. And which does give some evidence to the fact that if you even put a little bit of a clean color in, especially when you're using broken notes like this, it can influence the entire field by just having a few anchor points of more extreme color. The entire field is impacted visually. Okay. This is another one of my favorites. And it's easier for me to, oh, do you have a question?
When you do those color pickers with the little circles, are you using Photoshop?
Yes, I'm using Photoshop. So I pull the image into Photoshop and I just use the color picker, and then I
eyedropper tool,
color a circle.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's the only measurable way that I have to be concrete. But even then, like, I'm picking a very small moment, you know, although I think the color picker does pick, you can decide how large an area it's picking from.
Oh,
it's really smaller, tight. It's choosing maybe like a 5 pixel radius or something like that. So you can make adjustments to it. It is fascinating though to see it pulled out of context.
Yeah, it really is.
When I started doing it, I was like, this is so insane. Like, okay, now this is the painting that I did. I was actually in England for my friend's wedding, and it was the morning. And in England, in the springtime, in the morning, you look out, and the only thing you see is green. I mean, green grass, green hedge, green foliage on the trees. It was just a festival of green. And I saw that the light was streaming. It was beautiful. There were these little daffodils in the distance. This is like a 6x8. It's actually a really tiny painting. So, but I'm going to break it down. I know what I was thinking, so I'm not even guessing um, when I describe to you what happened. So this is the process of painting it. So one of the first things that I do when I'm confronted with an all green scene, and yet I see it as beautiful because there is a light effect and I want to paint it. One of the first things that I will do is I will choose my truest green in the scene. I will say, one of these is the most green. What is it? And there were really two moments here, this part of the hedge here, and this part of this bush over here. Now, just the part of it where it was on the edge, not the whole thing. And then the same, this whole hedge, not the whole of it was a clean green, but I've got two really green moments. I identify my green moment, and then every other moment is compared to that green moment. And it moves directionally. Either it's close, but slightly different, or it's dramatically different from that one key green. So in the scene, when I look at this tree, if I just stare at the tree by itself, the tree will be green. But if I compare this part of the hedge to this tree, I can see how is it different from this green. And I paint the direction of difference as opposed to making it exactly the same. So the same for the grass in light, the grass in shadow, and the grass in shadow over here. Even these distant trees and the trees it frames itself. I am never painting the color by looking directly at it. I am only painting the color, comparing it to my key anchor green notes. This is very similar to the approach that you use when you do value painting, where you consider your darkest dark and your lightest light, and you establish those and you compare everything to that. And it helps you to make sure that you have a dark, a light, and a middle. So the procedure leads you to organize your thinking. So this is one of the procedures that I have used to help me to organize my color thinking when I am overwhelmed. Okay. So what direction does the green lean? Here is a list of all the possible color directions that it might lean in. Have I, in the moment, had a time when I did not know what direction it was leaning in? Oh yeah, like all the time, all the time. I'm not like Neo in the Matrix, just kind of like, ah, yes, oh, I see it all is clear to me now. It's like, what is that? I'm not sure. So what do? I'm on my palette. I have this color mixed up. It's on my palette so I can see it in context. And I start mixing comparatively. So I mix a color, I make a yellow green next to it. Then I try a blue green. Then I try a red green. My palette is getting filled with mixtures that might never be used because I'm just trying it and trying it and trying it. I'm doing a visual comparison to this green. So I look up at the scene, this green, that green, this green. Okay, what's the direction? Okay, I think, well, okay, it's definitely not as clean. So it's not going to be just yellow and blue, right? Or if this is this yellow and this blue, it at least can't be that. So I have a process of elimination. Okay, well, what if I try adding red to it? What if I try adding this? What if okay, is it darker or lighter? So you just start checklisting. You just start throwing things at it and then observing the relationship and putting it down. As long as you are pushing the relationship a little bit closer to the relationship that you see, you have advanced your painting and you have advanced your understanding. And you are a little bit better and faster at it every time that you do it. So here are all the different areas that we are going to look at and compare them to our anchor greens. Dun, dun, dun. So this leans blue, this leans purple, this leans orange, this leans yellow-orange, and this just went with a brown. So you can see that I actually did all of the color variety, like I picked almost every part of the rainbow, but I did not necessarily go crazy with it and full saturation, clean, intense blue, clean, intense purple. You can take things in a direction and you can push them there a little, or you can push them there a lot. And that alone is part of your personal language. Are you someone who likes to really push it like I did in this painting where I went all the way there? Or is it a situation where you want to be subtle the way I did it here? I'm the same person. I use the same procedures, but I had a different aesthetic light effect in mind. And so all is available to us with directional color thinking. The keys to the kingdom. So in the less green areas, what not green direction does it go in? And you can just, go through your checklist on your palette. You can even try mixing them. Try throwing them down on the palette itself. So to avoid using, now this is a little bit similar also to when you're establishing edge variety in your work. And so you might have already learned that when you're trying to get good variety of edges for like sharp and soft edges, that it's actually easier to make everything blurry and then choose only certain areas to make sharp, because we intuitively want everything to be sharp, because when we stare at something, it goes into focus, right? So if you force yourself to make it all blurry and then you go in and you make only carefully decided sharps, it's actually procedurally easier and it sets you up for variety in your edges. So just like, when you look at, you can think about it in terms of organizing values, organizing edges, organizing color. Now, this is another painting that I did where I was actually had kind of a goal of being really, really accurate. I was in a really blue sky day. I had multiple days to work on it, and the weather looked like it was going to be consistent. A meaningful site to me, it being my family's farm. And I wanted to paint it faithfully. So I did. I mixed, I tried to make every color exactly what I saw. I did not do any big exaggeration, and I did not do any big, unification. Like sometimes in order to make an area hold together, you might push all the colors and values or everything together more than you actually see. I was trying to be very, very faithful. And what I had at the end was just an incredibly boring painting. I mean, oh my goodness. Like it was just, it felt claustrophobic. And it was not actually the experience of the scene and of the place. So it's a farm, but it's no longer a working farm. And this is all mown grass. And we all know what mown grass looks like. It all just looks exactly the same. Like it's just relentlessly green, right? Now, yes, it shifted colors as it went into the background. Thank goodness I had a couple shadows where I could see, some variety there. And I was very careful to really observe these colors. But then it was just torture, because I was standing there looking at it on the third day of painting on it, thinking, what am I going to do to save this painting? Because it looks so static. And yet, as I stand here and look at the scene, it feels sweeping and wide open. I'm in the flatlands of Minnesota. It was like big sky country, but I only had this little piece of sky in my painting. So the big dilemma then becomes, how can I capture the feeling of this place and still use all of this faithful copying that I've done of the color and the reflection of the relationships. And so I knew I was in enough trouble that I was really willing to do anything. So I just mixed this color here. I just mixed a big pile of it. And I just was like, I'm going to start fresh. I'm going to start with my color direction all over again. And I did this big note here, these big marks. And as I put them down, because I never do anything without intention, I thought, I'm going to try to reflect the sky into the grass, right? So here's this cloud. And so if this was water, the cloud would reflect like this way, right? So I put it down, kind of reflecting the cloud. And I was like, okay, and then we'll go from there. But as soon as I did it, the whole painting just went click, and it felt like the scene. I also had a little bit of an idea in my mind that maybe there's like that thing on grass where the light shimmers, where the grass bends, like at the bend, you'll get this like highlight on the grass. So I was kind of thinking that I was representing that in a broad way, not in a specific way, but I was using that to sort of justify putting this down. And a little bit to justify what color, the fact that I was going so much lighter. But I will say, I was like, oh, well, I think that's done it. Like, I thought I was about to restate this entire painting, but just doing this one moment of really active mark making helped to activate the entire color story of the painting. And so sometimes when you are painting the landscape, you can be trying to study or do different things, but a wildly experimental moment is necessary to express what it is that you are seeing in full, not just the snapshot of that little frame, but to express all of it, the weather, the light, you know, the space around you that is not actually in frame. And you have to find ways to express it and to give yourself permission to try those things and to be expressive, even if it ruins the painting. Because let me tell you, a wildly experimental painting that looks kind of cool and maybe is ruined is actually a lot more interesting than an overworked, beaten to death, you know, realistic, accurate painting. Um, okay, so here is Innes, who is also an incredible landscape painter. And here he is, and he has shifted. He's got plenty of green. See, he's got green in this landscape. This is probably an all green landscape as he was actually looking at it. He's doing the yellow shift thing because the sun is down here, coming down or coming up. And so things are all unifying and getting yellower as they are approaching the sun here. But notice how much brown he has representing green. So this is a good example of like what I've heard referred to as like brown sauce paintings, where they use brown as like their big anchor, and then they shift away from brown in certain parts of the painting. And this is a kind of color painting. So you start with brown, and then as you shift away from brown, even a little bit, it starts to look green. You don't even need to get to a very clean, bright green for it to start reading as such, which gives you then lots more color language to use over here if you would like. Now, this is a Theodore Penley Boyd Yarra Valley landscape, Australian painter. Oh my goodness, he is amazing. And if you do not already know about his work, you should absolutely look him up. So most of the greens in traditional paintings have actually a lot of browns and ochres in it. And for the most part, we look at a scene like this and we just accept it. And we just say, yeah, that looks like realism. That looks like green. And yet it is not the actual green that we see. We accept it because our brains are so accustomed to seeing things going crazy that we're actually very good at figuring out what color something is supposed to be. So here is a color pick of this section of the painting. And you can see when I isolate the colors, they're very ochre green, and then they shift into blues here as they go into the distance. Here, it's so dark that it reads like black, right? So we've got high contrast, lower contrast, the checklist starts to emerge. But you can see that his anchor green note, his greenest note, is actually almost brown, right? It has so much red, so much orange in it. And yet, when you just look at the whole painting, you really experience it as green. But it does give him, plenty of play for what other colors to go into. Now let's look at the other side of the painting. And I've color picked it over here as well. When green is dominating the scene, you will be able to see it in even greater variety the longer you study it. So here we have our anchor, ochre green. Look at this red shift. Is that not red? I mean, it's so overt, like it's inescapable. Sure, the mountains have gone blue, no doubt about it. Here's your atmospheric perspective, but what's happening here in the middle? That's a little more red than we thought, right? And yet in context here, it all just reads as it's flowing across the landscape. Now let's see what happens if we look at a true vibrant green and we put it right in the middle. That's the green that I see in the grass when I look out my window. He is not even remotely close to it. But it doesn't matter because he has created a world of nuance of green, and our eyes just register it as such. And so you can start with brown sauce like this, or you could probably start in almost any color direction you like. And then if you show the cascading relationships as they move away, it will still work. Isn't this fascinating to see this color green? Is when I first started painting and I was in the landscape, this is the color I thought I was having to find, right? Didn't we all experience that when you go outside and you're like, yeah, I see this color everywhere I look. But when you start with this color, you quickly run out of, the ability to use it. Like you just blast your eyes out with this green. You've got to find some not green things in order to activate the experience of the landscape and the reality of how we see it. Now let's look, same painter. This is an example of him painting the light effect or the color key. Instead of keying off of an accurate depiction of the green in front of you, he is identifying the color key or the light effect that is in front of him. He even called this one the blue haze. And so this whole scene has been shifted to blue, to a bluer cast. And it does express a different feeling. Then we look at this here again. He has shifted everything blue. He is painting a light effect. He's painting a color key instead of keying on an accurate green and then going from there. He has desaturated these greens, in fact, because look, maybe that's your greenest moment. These are probably white trunk trees, but look at how blued and low saturation it is. And yet it reads as a colorful painting because of these elements in here. This is all supporting characters for this glorious moment right here. Now we see another scene where he's pushed it, instead of bluer, he's gotten it even warmer. So now we're painting even redder than what it was before. Was it just slightly later in the day? Maybe. This is a watercolor. Just a side note that you can do these things in all different media. So now here is a little color collection of his paintings. Look at how he has the ability to paint the landscape, and every single one looks like it could have been a different time of day, a different light effect. He is not someone that you necessarily would have said, oh, look at the grand colorist. You might have dismissed it and said, oh, he's brown sauce painter, or, oh no, he's just a value painter and he's just only doing values. No, he's doing all of the things. But he's doing them maybe without quite as exaggerated a hand as other people who might be called colorists, but he is in fact using color and getting quite a lot of variety in his greens in nature. I mean, honestly, if this doesn't convince you, what will? Look at this red right here. It's insane. It was so exciting when I was originally making this graphic. All right, now here is the great colorist, Henry Henshey, and we're gonna look at a series of his and then see the collage of them at the end, just like I did.
I just want to interrupt you for a second and let you know that it is 2:25.
Oh no, am I running out of time? Shoot, how did that happen? I even skipped the other part.
Just okay. I know there's so much to talk about with color.
I know, color is such a big topic. Oh shoot, yeah, I really got to go fast. I don't have that much more. Okay, so here's Henry. This is, at first I thought it was a cloudy day. I think it was actually like an insipid light day. But you can see he's got a lot of variety. Things are definitely, there are greens in here, but there's a lot of variety of things leaning away from green. And then here's another Henry Henshey painting the color key instead of the accurate green. So maybe there are some moments here, but look, the light is what he is painting, not the color of the grass, the color of the light. And then you see, even when he has a mass, there's tends to be a lot of variety within that mass in terms of color direction. Pink, orange, blue, purple, mud, and then the next one here is another light effect, sunny day. Look at all the variety in the greens here. And yet He does not say, oh, we can't paint the color green. Look down here, that's practically that brilliant green dot down here. So just because it's green doesn't mean you're not allowed to use green. It just means that you use it in context, and it doesn't mean you don't have to put it everywhere. All right, next. Oh, and then this one also. Similar scene, but a very different light effect. And then we get to see his color collection, and you see the variety of light keys that are expressed with a lot of color variety inside the mask. Then we look at Garber again. We've seen this one where you have the blue shift, you have the red shift, and now here's a straight up value rendering by Garber, where it is ochre in the foreground, gradually getting lighter and bluer in a very progressive way. It feels a little bit more static to me than some of his other paintings, but it's still a gorgeous painting. Lots of perspective language here. And then now we hear this painting feels very approachably green. It doesn't look like he's done anything super exaggerated except for possibly how blue he's allowed some of the things to get. But you can still see he's got shadowed foreground silhouetting here with some blues, but they're pretty dark. And then he's using all the language. I love how he does this framing thing. He's really one of my favorite landscape painters. Oh, this is my note to myself to do a color picker graphic of this someday. Okay, and now here's his collage. Look at the variety of light keys that he is painting, and all of these scenes likely had a lot of green in them when he looked at them, but he was painting an interpretation of the landscape. He was painting accurate relationships as opposed to pinpointing an accurate singular color in isolation. So we don't have another critique group, but I will give you an assignment if you want to have some way to grapple with the things that we've talked about today. So the assignment that you would do on your own would be to go ahead and make a study or a vista of something that has a distance element. So really kind of get into atmospheric perspective and something where there's green, right? So choose only the one thing to be truly green, and then you only paint the modifier or the lean of the green everywhere else. So you're putting down reds, you're putting down purples and browns. Then you can go back in and make all of those side moments greener, but only by first procedurally always checking and looking at your first true green every time, like every time. This is about diligence. You look at it and then you adjust to how close. Is it almost as green, or is it really not much green at all when you've compared it to your true green note? And then as a bonus exercise, if you want to do a more advanced color exercise, don't even let your true green anchor color be all that green. Like let it be something like ochre or something way bluer than you think, and then try shifting everything in a direction and see where that takes you. Okay, so here, I'll put this also in the chat. So this is about applying color shift to your work and the concept of color shift. Thinking about color as something that is directional as opposed to pinpointed really helps you to feel more free about using it. Okay, so, oh my goodness, do we really only have a half an hour? All right, well, I'm just gonna like shift into demo mode here. So I'm gonna stop the share. It'll take me a few minutes to just set up the camera, and then we'll just immediately start painting so that we don't run out of time. I know color is such a big topic, but this is a good moment if you want me to answer questions while I get set up. You can do that too.
Are you guys all going to go out and look at greens in a whole new way now? Yeah, me too.
Some of you have taken this class before, so you already knew about this redshift thing that I was talking about.
Yeah,
but
you absorb it more, you know, like it. We need to hear it again and again.
The first time I taught this class, I asked everyone, I was like, so how many of you have ever heard of the red shift? And people were just like, no, like no one is talking about. I did have one person who she had heard about using red as a neutralizer and therefore shifting things to become more neutral with red.
Abigail, if you study astronomy, there is the red shift.
Yes, there is.
That's how they can tell things are moving away from us.
Dun,
right?
dun, dun. It's all connected. Yeah, I love that.
While Abigail's setting up her camera there, do you guys want to see palette, painting, all of them? What do we want to see a closer up view of?
I think the painting more
The
than the
painting.
palette for me.
I was just going to say palette,
Yeah.
but only because I've never put little blobs of white next to each color. And I took my grandson out painting Sunday, gave him a little lesson, and I did that with him for the first time. And it really, I think, helped him.
Yeah,
So,
it's a little bit of a meditation kind of thing to do that helps you to reminds you of all your colors. I think of it literally like a stretching exercise. Like I just do it and I always end up using it.
mhm.
Abigail, why don't we start with seeing your palette, because we just talked about color and like mixing across and
Now my palette, oh my goodness, I should be ashamed.
I forget what part of the lecture you were going to talk about.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, I was going to show how procedurally when I am painting, and especially if I'm painting in a color mindset, like when I'm, because I paint, I have different modes of painting. Sometimes I'm painting like, when I paint alla prima on the spot, and I'm just looking to kind of capture the vibe of the scene right out of the gate. And there are other times when I set up paintings to study the color, and I have like a little goal list in mind of something that I want to work on. Like I've had moments where I was like, I'm really going to pay close attention to my shapes this time, or I'm going to work on having edge variety and thinking about edges, or I feel like I am relying too hard on having everything be so brightly colored. Maybe I want to try doing a painting where I keep everything very grayed down and only show the nuance. Like those are little problems that I set for myself very often. I honestly rarely start a painting without some kind of inner stated goal like that to help push me forward. Part of it is just I always have those kinds of things floating in my mind, but part of it is that I have definitely learned that if I am not actively working to grow, it really just doesn't happen. like I just start painting the same painting over and over again, and that gets kind of boring. Like I remember a time I used to paint lots of sunset paintings, and at first it was all very exciting because it was one of the few things I could do successfully. So I did it a lot because it made me feel good about myself. And I could sell sell sunset paintings. Little quick sunset paintings were, very important to my income early in my career. And then I got to the point where I would go out and there would be this glorious sunset and that I should paint. And I would go, yeah, but I know what this is going to turn out looking like. And then I wouldn't paint it. And I was like, that was a key moment. Like if it was getting boring, I clearly needed to be challenging myself with something else, either about the sunset or just topically moving on to something else, maybe painting longer on things. Like that was a pivotal moment when I abandoned painting a sunset, when that was like my whole thing was like painting sunsets for years. I still like painting sunsets sometimes. It's a bigger challenge now because I'm out of practice. So it's more exciting. Okay, so I'm just doing my standard, setting up, reminding myself of all of my colors. This also helps me to know if I have a color that is so dried out that it can't be used when I lay it out fresh.
Abigail, what palette knife are you using?
Ooh, that's a good question. This is, let me see it. T30
Yes.
Creative Mark.
Ah,
I have heard a lot of people like the Holbein palette knives, like the really expensive ones, but I will tell you that those things are not durable. If you drop them once, they are bent and crimped and you cannot save them. And I have just, even though it's really nice how they're so flexible and everything, there's a price to be paid for durability. So this is the one I've landed on. I like a palette knife that comes to a point so that I can use it like a calligraphy brush. I do not like the ones that have the really wide rounded edge. And the ones that are really short and stumpy, you might think you have more control, but the control comes from having it come to a point, not having it not be big. Like I can just pick up this much and have a lot of control. Or because it's nice and long, I can pick up this much and cover a large area. That's definitely an area where I am a little bit picky about the knife. Even if I am ever teaching an in-person class, I can't handle it if the student doesn't have the kind of knife I like, which is something I used to make fun of my teachers for all the time. And now look at me, just like them. It's just terrible. Okay, so when I'm painting a scene, I might say, oh, okay, I'm gonna say that the grass is, I'll start with like an ochre thing, like I'll start with some brown, I'll even kick it a little bit red, and then I'll maybe take some of my blue and a yellow, like a real standard green. This is like the grassy kind of green color that we expect that we'll be using. I'll take this green and I'll add it to that brown and red, right? And I'll figure out a color, a base color. So now I've made an ochre green. So I figure out my base color. If I'm smart, I mix myself a nice big pile of it. So let me just go ahead and get a little bit more aggressive with how big this pile is. So I'll have my big base color here of the grass or, you know, whatever the thing is. And I'll have my color for what it is in light. And then I'll have my color for what that same thing is in shadow, you know, compared to one another. So in shadow, that kind of a thing might be a sort of purple. And then because it's already blue, if I throw a little bit of green into it, then I have a nice dark. So I set them up right next to each other, the light to the shade. But then I'll have these piles and I maintain these piles. I don't think I've done this part of the talk in this particular class. So have I done the talk in this class where I show you how I make my adjustment strings? No?
I've seen it, but I don't know if it was this class or not.
I know, I can't remember.
Same.
So this is how I use the kicker colors. This is what I had slides for. So I'll have my base note for like a big mass or area in the painting. And then say, I'm like, within that mass, I want to change the direction of the color. And I already have all of these kicker color piles that I started out with. They're all, you know, too bright for the shadow area, but I can just say, oh, I want this shadow to be a little bit more purple. So I will take a piece, but never all, of this color and I pull it away and I can take my purple and try to value match this color. And this is the key, is being able to match the value. So the way that you know that you have matched the value is if you make a flat field of the color and you take your new color and you dot it or float it right on top. If it disappears when you squint, then you've got your values are very close together. So this would be too light, and this would be too dark, right? Because they show up. And this middle range note that I mixed right next to it of clean purple, when I float it, it disappears, especially when you squint. That's how you know you've got a little bit of a value match, right? Once you've matched the value, you've eliminated at least, you know, one factor, and you can now say, okay, here is clean purple at this end, and I will mix it up in here. So now I've got my purple matched in value. This is this base green that I started with. And here it is where it is slightly influenced by the purple. And then I take my slight influence of purple, pick it up, put it down here, add a little bit more purple to it. And now I have a color string where I have my base color going directionally purple as I go down. And so I can, in my painting, you know, I'm using this base color and I want to modify it this way or that way, and I can create this string of purple. I can then take another string over here of another color, any color I like, blue, black, orange, and do a subtle shift of letting it go in that color direction. Sometimes I even let it go both color and value, like this. See how I'm just making I'm blue shifting it and also making it darker as I go. And then this is where it gets really cool. So I'll have all these like color strings happening on my palette as I'm working, right? And sometimes I end up doing this and I bridge across and I'm like, oh, what if I do this? Is shifted to the purple, but I wanted a little bit more blue as well. And see, I'm pulling it over like this. And now I've got the mixture of the two in between. But see, there's a geographic quality of, I can see that this is the original color and it's going purple. Here's the color, it's going blue. And I can still compare it geographically to the color of the light. So these represent the kicker colors, and that's my mother pile or my base note. So that's how I organize my palette when I'm mixing, if you find that helpful. And I'm very careful to never run out of my base color, right? So if I get down to the very end of my base color, I mix it anew right next door until I've matched it, and then I can start afresh. So otherwise you end up with giant piles of useless paint. If you use up your whole mother pile, you know, that you worked so hard for, and you need to always be seeing, not just in relationship on your canvas, but also in relationship on your palette. I do a lot of mixing on my palette. So once I'm in a particular area, I might just pick up a kicker note and mix it right onto the painting. Look, I made a letter A. I just realized that. Okay. That is something I like to usually demonstrate at some point when I'm doing a demo. How much time do I have?
We have about 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Because this is our last day, I'm happy to take requests. If there's a particular thing you want me to like review or talk about the process of anything, I'm going to try to push this painting forward a little bit. Oh my goodness, my studio is just so crowded. I have like, I have no space to move around. I have to like move something just to adjust something. I'm trying to get closer to the painting so that you can really see what I'm doing. Sorry, I have to move these things so that I can move. Think about, what can I do to take this painting where it needs to ultimately go? I'm also looking for my good brush that I've been using. That's not the one that's all super hardened. So looking at the painting, I've done a little bit more of an exaggeration of the blue shift in the branches, but I'm really enjoying it. But I do feel like it's such an exaggeration of the blue shift that it could use some balancing and have another moment of exaggerated shift somewhere so that it's not in isolation. Maybe I could use in here, because that would give me a diagonal conversation with the blue. I'm gonna use some very dark blue, and I'm gonna try like just putting it in just to see what I think. I kind of like it, but it's not perfect. Oh, there you go, that's better. Look, now I'm just smearing it and it's doing more what I wanted it to do. It's having a conversation with this blue up here, like showing a stronger, brighter, or like a clean blue harmony, but here it is in dark and there it is in light, but for different reasons. Again, very aware of my shapes being interesting. It's gone a little bit too far, so I'm gonna kick it back with a little bit of Viridian killed with black right here. But I'm also kind of being careful. I don't want to lose all of this super transparent stuff that I have in that foreground because I enjoy that also. Okay. And really, if I'm doing this sort of more chromatic shifting here, I probably need to acknowledge some more purple as it goes around. You don't usually get really brilliant blues showing up in a color harmony without a slightly more brilliant purple nearby, somewhere nearby. And this is, I'm not pulling this from the painting, I'm pulling this from my inner library of color experiences. So, although actually I look at my painting and I'm seeing some purple spots. So I'm actually gonna just steal that information and I'm gonna put some more brilliant purple on the underside, which is where I seem to have seen most of it. Here, although then definitely like a little bit of a glaze of purple right there. Oh yeah, see, that made that blue make more sense. Now that I've glazed, very light touch glazed some purple shimmer over these darks. And it makes that color saturation there make a little more sense. I'm gonna knock that one back down with some brown. Whew, that was kind of a relief. Now up here, I'm gonna break in and I'm gonna put in some more texture because I have all these vertical grassy spots, but I have not put in a lot of the foliage texture. So as I go in to put my foliage texture, I'm looking to stay in the zone, but get a little bit more variety. Remember my shape, design. As I go in, I do a lot of this where I'm like thinking about my design before I place it down. Like I do a little practice run with my brush in the air before I start painting it. Don't golfers do that when they're about to do a stroke? They like practice the stroke before they hit the ball?
I don't know, maybe.
Any golfers in the mix who can?
Yes, they do.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, it sounds like just like it is in painting then.
There you go.
Okay, and then now, as I'm doing these more isolated leaves, I'm about to like shift over and put a little bit of the filigree of like the little dot details. Like sometimes when I'm painting, especially at the end, I'm looking like for, I have another friend who well, an old friend. I haven't talked to him in forever though, but and he likes to teach this concept he calls point line mass way of thinking about organizing your painting, where you have masses and you have dots and points and you have line. And so it's your whole composition is basically a series of points, lines, and masses. And so, and I feel like the points in my mind over the years, as I've, enjoyed having that organizational structure in my mind, the points become these little moments of filigree and details. And they are an essential part of the composition, but because detail doesn't just exist to be detail, it has to fit in some kind of a larger scheme, right? So it has to coordinate itself with the lines and the masses, so as I get to the end of the painting and I'm trying to put my points in, I put them in by observing the lines and the masses and thinking, where is it useful to have a point decorating the scene or offering relief from, maybe a line is too consistent. Maybe a mass needs to be activated. So the other thing that I talked about a while back was in the painting over here, there are these moments where I have these orangey grasses, coming up, and I said that I would wait to do those closer to the end. So since this is essentially the end of this demo, I'm gonna go in. And these are the filigree sort of finished moments of, trying to, oh, you know what? I just noticed that because this is behind and this is in front, maybe if I let the light of the sky eat around this just a little bit more, it'll be that much more effective. Let me do that. I'm taking some orange and some magenta, and I'm gonna bring it here, and then I'm gonna freshen up the darkness with a little bit of a glaze of brown, giving myself like a slightly wet note here. I'm just trying this to see if I like what it will do. Ooh, and I can use my transparent orange, but I need to use it with this purple because orange by itself is going to be a little bit too intense. So in this case, I'm also this is a moment to break into the medium because this color is too dark on its own. So I'm going to use my medium to help me glaze over it. So it's lightening it and pushing it in a color direction, pushing it a little bit orange, a little bit purple. I'm going to do it a little bit more purple. And I think I am going to let it be just a tiny bit of white in it to lighten it even further. Especially right here, right where they meet. I like that. It's subtle, but it helped that branch to push away in space. To me anyway. And then here I've got this break in the branch waiting for its foliage moment. Okay, so now back to the thing I was talking about, the orange. So it doesn't necessarily need to be brilliant orange. Maybe I want it to be kind of neutral. So I'm going to actually take that color that I mixed before, calling it like the color of the light. I'm adding some transparent orange to it. And I'm going to zoom out, partly so that I can get my hand in here. But also when I'm doing this kind of a thing, here, real quick, I'm going to replace, here, I'm going to add a spotlight. Okay, can you see me here? So I've been painting like this, closer to the painting, but when I'm going to do these final details, I walk away and my hand inches back from the brush. So I'm now at the end of the brush so that I'm far away from the painting. so that I can see the whole thing as much as possible. If this was a large scale painting, I would have run a couple yards away from the painting and looked at it from far, far away and made some decisions about where I'm going to throw some things, and then run back up to the painting and from as far away as possible, gone like this. So right now I've got this little tiny 6x8, so I can definitely do this, but if I'm going to put in a detail moment, I'm going to do it from far away so I can see how it communicates with the rest of the painting. I'm trying to keep it feeling loose and free, trying to remember my perspective language by keeping scale in place. If I'm going to put in some random moments, if they're in the foreground, they're taller, and they're smaller as they go back. Like that never goes away from my thoughts. And then I had this moment that I kind of liked where it was like just a real neutralized green color here. And I just let the grass that was close to the trunk, I need to make a more substantial pile. If there's not enough paint for me to pick up a blob, then you just have to kind of stop and make the pile of paint. Like you can't rely on, what you definitely don't want to rely on your turpentine to make your paint to flow, because that's going to just force all the colors to dissolve into each other. You can use medium to a certain extent, although I generally try to not use medium very much if I'm doing alla prima, because it can have some of that same thing. A lot of medium usually has some turpentine in it, but not if you're just using oil. Okay. I wanted to do this big thing. I'm worried about this being, I think it's okay. I was worried about it being too light, but I need a line to break through the branches here.
That might have to be your closing statement, Abigail.
Oh no.
I know. I hate
that. My closing statement?
It looks great.
Oh, good. I just wanted to have some verticals that interrupted these other things. And then just because I can't quite handle it, I feel like I need I'm going to juice up this real distant daffodil bed with a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
A little more.
If you want to put in a few marks while answering the question, I have a
yeah. If you have a question for me.
Let's see. Susan is asking, how many times on average will you come back to work on a painting, and how long will you work to complete a painting on one outing?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, it varies dramatically. Normally, if I'm doing a tiny 6x8, I would do it in one sitting. This, this painting here that I'm painting from was a 9x12, and it was done in one sitting. So, but I have paintings that that ebb and flow at very different speeds. So, and I a little bit have cultivated that because I want to be able to work alla prima, like on site, and be able to just execute something when I need to. But I do paint a little differently, and I approach it a little bit differently. So I would say usually if it's a outdoor landscape, I will be 1 or 2 sittings. One sitting if it's a 6x8, well, that's not even true, but 1 or 2 sittings when I'm working like 6x8 to 9x12. Usually it's 3 sittings for a 12x16. And then once I get higher than that, once I get larger than that, it's probably more like 4 to 10 times of revisiting a painting once I get into like 18x24 or larger. And then I have some paintings that I just designate multi-year paintings. So I have a painting that I just started this winter, and I might work on it this summer and just decide that I'm going to do it this summer. I'll show it to you. You see it? I don't know what the size of it is, but you can see based on me, like it's a big painting. And I just did a washi block-in of it. So this is like the tree line behind my house, and you can see like the vista because there's a farm behind. So I just set up a big brown red silhouette. The distant land is blue and all the glowing light is yellow. And that's basically all it was a pattern study, you know, with and getting it off white and into contrast and color direction. So that was my first like hit. And then I'm happy to wait until winter again when all these branches are revealed like this, and I'll just hit it again another year. Or I might change my mind and come at it and start throwing foliage on those branches this summer. We'll see. But there's definitely, I think, benefit to having paintings that you work on at different speeds, because there's something to be gained from the intuitive gestural, you've got 2 hours and then you're done. But there's also things to be learned from the revisiting, you know, until you feel like you've really exhausted your understanding and pushed possibly beyond your actual understanding. But I definitely, when I do a still life, I do that quite often. So I work on my still lifes often longer than my landscapes, because I just keep revisiting them. Some of it is that I've gotten really interested in building up the texture of the surface too. And it's hard to do that when everything's wet. It's easier if things have had a chance to dry, and then you can build on top of those, the topography of the dried paint.
Thank you, Abigail. I thought it was a silly question after I posted it, but you made it into a great question. Thank you.
It's a really good question. No, it is a good, and I am often, it's so interesting. That is the question that like, everyone's always wants to know. And then a lot of times when you ask an artist, they're just like, pshaw, you know, like they don't, but I think it's meaningful. There is a thing, I think, because some people feel like if you can execute something really amazing in a short period of time, that it's like there's a little bit of a skills show, like, you know, that you like mic drop, that you can do that. It is a particular skill to do that, but it's another particular skill to work on something for years, you know, without killing it. Okay. Well,
Okay.
that concludes the class portion of this round of the landscape. We'll take a brief break. What time is it? I can't tell my screen, like
3:06.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's not that bad. Okay. I was like, is it 3:30? Like I was ready for it to be 3:30.
You all could have happily watched you paint until 3:30.
I know, but yes. And but it's good. We designate a certain amount of time, and we should try to hold to that.
Yes, we should.
Okay. So let's take we'll come back at 3:15 like we normally do to get started on the coaching group. But thank you to everyone who's just in the class. It's been really fun to go through this dialogue, you know.
Thank
about
you, Abigail.
Hopefully, you know, it'll help you on your journey. I will confess, it helps me on my journey to teach these classes. Like there is nothing like teaching class to like make yourself think deeply about it, and then to make the concepts more concrete in your mind. So it is a blessing to me that to be able to teach this class. Okay, I will see some of you at 3:15.